Welcome to another episode of Talk Advocacy to Me, a show where we tackle one hot customer advocacy question at a time with the real movers and shakers in the customer marketing and advocacy space. We are joined here today by Kristen Auguste, and she is going to share why ongoing education and enablement can be make it or break it for anyone building a customer advocacy portfolio. Welcome,
Awesome.
Kristen.
Yeah,
Thank
welcome,
you.
Kristen. We're so
Happy
excited.
Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Spooky.
Oh my gosh, we should have dressed up. How lame are we?
I did dress up. I'm just kidding.
Well, we are so excited. I am so excited to have Kristen on here specifically. I love having guests on where I've gotten to know someone really well. I've gotten to see a lot of their work firsthand. So Kristen, thank you for being on here. But I want to give everyone just a feel for your background, why they should be listening to you when it comes to education and enablement in advocacy related fields. So for about, I'd say, like looking at your LinkedIn, Kristen, the last 7 years, you've really been focused on architecting specifically customer advocacy and experience at organizations like Paycor, Mendix, and now, of course, you're at Siemens, which we're going to hear some more about that. But for years before that, you were already supporting cross-functional alignment on numerous marketing and org-wide initiatives with a career starting in education, right? So we're going to hear some of that as well. I would say that one of your superpowers is your ability to think really big, like very high level. And that's allowed you to take on kind of a massive job, your current role right now of building an advocacy center of excellence, which involves educating and enabling a really large group of stakeholders, which is going to be really fascinating to talk about today. So part of that role specifically that you were brought into with Siemens is to build an advocacy center of excellence from the very ground up. And I'm just going to read the mission statement of Siemens Global Customer Advocacy Center of Excellence so that you'll see how it connects to the topic that we're talking about here today. So the Global Customer Advocacy Center of Excellence is the goal is to connect, educate, and support customer advocacy stakeholders across Siemens by working from a common set of operating principles designed to elevate the customer experience through all points throughout the customer lifecycle. So just a little small task that you have before you.
A little bit.
Yeah, and you can get into the background of like just how extensive that looks at Siemens as we talk, but I don't want to do all the talking. I'm going to hand it over to you for a minute and just, Kristen, give people a little bit more meat on that background that I gave on you and how this all plays into this topic of enablement and education and customer advocacy.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm so excited to be here today. This is probably one of my favorite topics. I was telling Liz and Deena this before we started. I'm super passionate about enablement and educating different stakeholders, whether it's customers or internal people as well. And as Liz mentioned, a lot of my background has been on the education and enablement of customers. So I started out early on in support and then training and then customer success. So a lot of my career has really been interacting with customers and educating them around certain areas. I would say I fell into advocacy 5 to 6 years ago, and I fell in love with it. Absolutely loved it. Again, I've been on the customer side, and it was such an amazing, eye-opening field for me. And I got just very excited because you get to, one, work internally with stakeholders, but then also you're still working with customers and you're really interacting with them. So I've spent the last few years, as Liz mentioned, really standing up programs and educating internally for those programs that I was standing up. And within about the last year or so, I moved over to Siemens to stand up the Center of Excellence. And as Liz mentioned, it's a big undertaking, but it brings to the forefront the area that I'm most passionate about is educating and enabling internal stakeholders across Siemens. I love it. It's probably one of my favorite things about advocacy is that you get to touch, I would say, almost every part of the organization on a daily basis, which I love interacting with people. I love educating people so that they have kind of that aha moment where they're like, oh, this is what advocacy is, and this is how it benefits the organization. So I would say that's really led me to where I am at, and the excitement that I've had in standing up the Center of Excellence.
Just to give people a little bit of the background picture, Kristen, like, how many stakeholders are we talking about? How many products?
Well, we have a lot of products. I would say on a stakeholder basis, we are really interacting across obviously marketing and customer success and sales, but we also have different product units that we're focused on. So, I mean, I would say we're interacting with at least 50 people regularly in different areas of the Center of Excellence, because we're focused in peer reviews and different programs that already exist. And so my job is never dull. I will say I literally probably meet someone new 2 to 3 times a week, because there's just so many different stakeholders involved in certain programs and so many great things that are already happening in the organization. So it's definitely, since I love working with different people, I'm never bored, which is a requirement for me in my job. I have to stay engaged in different areas and not have the same day over and over again.
Okay, I love this. So you're at a very large organization, obviously larger than a lot of people maybe who are going to be listening today. But you're coming in and your goal is you do have a hand in standing up some programs, and of course will more and more in the future, but you're also here to enable and support other people in advocacy initiatives. And I think that's probably both on educating them on the importance of doing it, period. So there's that side. And a lot of people probably listening are struggling with that. How do I even get people to buy into the value? But then you're also helping them with their initiatives once they bought into that, and making sure that everyone's aligned and everyone's approaching this the same way. So this is a very big task and a very high level role in advocacy we don't get to see very often. So that makes it really exciting to talk about. So you came in, or you can talk about Siemens, you can talk about one of your other roles, but you come in, you've got to build this rapport internally, what you're talking about. You've got to build all these relationships. So Kristen, like when you come in or when someone comes in, how do they even, what's the best practice for starting cold? Like you may not even have been introduced to these people.
Yeah, well, I love that part of things. That's the fun of it to me. I think in multiple organizations that I've been in, it didn't exist, right? This wasn't a function. It's almost like a startup environment, I say, when you start advocacy. And part of that is one, just introducing yourself to the different stakeholders around the organization and really understanding what do they do? What are their pain points? How are they, interacting within the company? I think it's important to understand that internally, but it's also important to understand your customers. So I do a lot of interviewing and introductions early on, just to understand the landscape. What do our customers value? What do they love? But then also, what do our internal teams struggle with? How can advocacy provide value? And I would say being in a COE is no different than standing up an advocacy program in other companies that are smaller, because at the end of the day, you have to get buy-in and support. You have to educate your stakeholders. And to do that, you literally are doing a roadshow consistently to educate your stakeholders. And it's even the basics of having a shared definition of customer advocacy. I have literally never met anyone that has the same definition of customer advocacy. And it's not saying, any one person's right or wrong, but this is how we're defining advocacy in the organization. This is the shared concept, and making sure teams understand that and how we can provide value. So when we're doing a roadshow, it's not a scripted, let's go around and just say the same thing. It's understanding where our team's struggling. How are we going to provide that value to them, so that later when we come back and do a roadshow, we're like, this is an area that will benefit you and has benefited you. And that's how you get buy-in and support.
How, just practically speaking, like getting into some nuts and bolts. So you need to, you said, first, you need to understand the internal stakeholders and what they can get, what's the value they can get out of advocacy. You also have to understand the customer. I'm assuming, because when you talk to internal stakeholders, if you don't even understand their customers, they're not really going to listen to you. So how much time before you even go on the roadshow, Kristen? Or like when you say roadshow, does that mean just roadshowing all the interviews first? Or do you mean when you say roadshow, going out and saying, this is what we're trying to do?
Both. I think it's important when you first come into an organization to understand the organization. I'm really big, as I love education and enablement, I'm big into knowledge myself. I want to understand the ins and outs before I can make recommendations, before I can say, this is how we're going to develop advocacy within this organization. It isn't a one size fits all approach. It's been very different in different organizations that I've been in. And so understanding, like you said, the customers and having that knowledge of what they value, a lot of times it's the same across different companies. It's the same types of things that they're interested in, but it's talking to them and understanding it really gives you that knowledge internally to say, hey, I get it. I understand what's important to your customers. I think that goes a long way. But then later, after you've done that initial kind of audit of the organization, and at Siemens, it was a large audit that's never ending. But after you've done that, you feel that I put together kind of that recommendation of where we're going and educate the organization on this is advocacy. This is the strategy that we're doing. This is how we can benefit you. And this is how we can work together. And so that's the area that I think is really important. And you never want to stop doing the roadshow because you don't want people to forget about you. Mm-hmm. It's important that you're top of mind to everyone in the organization. How are you providing value to customers? Why is it important what we're doing? I feel like I've always done that all the time in every organization I've been in, whether it's coming back to show how we provided value or whether we're just educating them on the importance of advocacy within the organization.
And to that point, Kristen, personnel is there. It's always changing. It's always evolving. So the education and enablement is never a one and done. You have people coming in and you have people coming out.
Absolutely.
You made 2 points, Kristen, that I just wanted to double down on that I think are really important. The first being, and we hear this all the time, and at some point in our practitioner lives, I'm sure that we kind of thought this as well, like, this doesn't apply to me. My organization is so much smaller, or I'm not, I'm not a Siemens. I'm not running a COE. So I just wanted to double down on that point that you made, that education and enablement and the way that you're talking about it really applies to, it's just the good practice if you're standing up a program, if you're standing up an important initiative, or if you're standing up a COE. And really, it's just the scope of work.
That's right.
That changes. So for you,
you have way more people that you're meeting with, but at the end of the day, you still need that cross-functional support. It doesn't matter how small of an initiative it is. It's important. And I've been in companies that are startup all the way to Siemens, and it's still the same mindset applies across the board. It's just a larger scale.
Absolutely. These best practices apply. And then the second point that I just wanted to double down on here is like what you're talking about. Really, this transcends customer marketing and advocacy. You're talking about real tried and true best practices for education and enablement. So if we have some listeners who are maybe kind of on the fringe or in a peripheral function, what we're talking about here really applies. Any strategic initiative, program, these are the best practices for making sure that the rest of the organization is educated, on board, and can become allies and cooperators for what it is that you're looking to do.
Which I love that point, just to tack onto that. Allies is a really good way to position it, because I think you need allies. You need to be able to show wins. One area around education enablement that I've done in multiple organizations is kind of standing up as a steering committee or an advocacy council around the organization. And those become your internal advocates, and they're going back to their teams and saying, hey, look at this, look how this can benefit our team. And that really helps, I think, to really get buy-in and support, because they're from those teams and they feel like they have a voice in what you're building. And they do, because advocacy to me is nothing if you don't have your internal stakeholders sharing their feedback, giving ideas. It's a collaborative effort at the end of the day. It isn't just me dictating this is the strategy and this is what we're doing. I want them to give feedback to improve. It's a very iterative process.
I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts, Kristen. So what are some of the things that you have operationalized to create a systematic approach to ongoing enablement and education for internal stakeholders or even just general awareness? Let's get into some actual tactics of what you've put in place, and it could be at Siemens or before.
Yeah, I would say it's probably similar in everywhere, but we're very focused right now, I would say, in Siemens is really standing up some of these areas to educate our stakeholders. And specifically, it's making sure that there is really content, an area that's available for our stakeholders, right? Whether it's SharePoint or HighSpot, there's an area that our stakeholders can come to really understand advocacy, the initiatives that we have, the enablement materials, right? If we make it easy to do things, it's always, you'll get more buy-in and support, and having those templates available or assets that they can use to really, focus on those areas. And then I think another key area that we're really trying to focus on is having regular educational sessions with the organization, right? Right now we're starting quarterly, but like, how are we showing, benefit to the organization, bringing stakeholders together that actually never really probably spoke, and really understanding best practices, right? Like, there are so many people within our organization that are doing the same thing, but a lot of my role was to come in to start to align those stakeholders so that there are best practices, there are things that we can do across the organization and take wins from each other. So we're really trying to do those quarterly sessions to make sure that we're enabling our stakeholders. And again, it's just making sure that you're consistently speaking to your stakeholders and that there's areas that they can go to and find educational materials. I think that's key in enabling them to do things.
I'm hearing a chewy.
I'm not sure. Yeah. Not me.
It's Deena's dog.
I love it.
Keeping it real here on Talk Advocacy. So, Kristen, I love that. So, somewhere where people can get access as needed, point in time, anytime, self-serve. There's the more hands-on, walking them through best practices, aligning people who might be doing the same thing internally, letting them probably share what they're doing that's working, what someone else, maybe a different product line could be using. But like you said, some people, when you came in, they were already doing a lot of this. And this is typical for someone who walks in there to take over advocacy, but other advocacy programs may live throughout the organization in different departments that were stood up organically. So as you're trying to bring all this alignment together, what are some best practices or what are some ways that you go about? Because it can be sensitive, right? You're coming in, somebody's already doing something, maybe it's already working really well, but now we want to create alignment across these programs, and that can be really difficult. How do you approach that? What's some of your best practices for that?
Yeah, I honestly have not dealt with a lot of resistance here, which is, this is probably the first place that I've worked where there is already some form of advocacy that's happening within the organization. So it was interesting to me, like, would there be that resistance? And part of it is just positioning of, I'm not here to take over programs. I think that's always the biggest concern, that you're coming in, I'm going to change everything. And no, it's not that. It's just educating on certain areas of importance of having that alignment. And I think most people have appreciated the, more process in certain areas, the ability to collaborate with other stakeholders, the really just seeing best practices in advocacy too, of like, I never actually really thought about that. And I actually heard that from a stakeholder last week of like, this is some really interesting things that other things are doing, or other programs, maybe potentially outside of Siemens. I'm going to really think about this for my program. And to me, that's always that aha moment of, why is advocacy important, or really understanding. I would say my passion in advocacy is around providing value to customers. That's often not thought of as an initial part of standing up some advocacy programs. And I really try to educate and create that alignment around that topic specifically. And I would say that's one of our key strategic initiatives within the COE, is making sure that we are providing value to our customers so that they do want to advocate on our behalf. And I know that sounds very simple, but oftentimes it's important to really lay that foundation and make sure everyone's aligned around one thing.
Absolutely. I think, and it's so interesting how this conversation is playing off of the conversation we had with Evan a couple of weeks ago, where we're like, you know what? you need to spend almost just as much time building advocacy internally as you do externally. But of course, the focus, of course, because the customer is powering the enterprise, but how do you balance that, right? So if you're needing to be that middle, I always think of it as a middle manager. Man, it's a tough role. You've got people talking to you from above. You've got to distill that information below. You've got to make sure your leaders are happy. You've got to make sure your people are happy. I feel like the customer marketer is a bit of that. Like, you have to have the advocates on both sides of the fence. How do you balance the need for to understand so much about the customer and also understand so much about your internal stakeholders? How do you approach that?
Well, again, this is my favorite area, so I feel like I'm biased in this. I love to understand everything about our internal stakeholders and customers, but you're right, it is a balance, right? I think a lot of our knowledge comes from understanding our customers that you can even share back to your internal stakeholders, right? Because some people are not meeting with customers regularly. Some people want that voice within the organization and have never really had it. And so, as you're saying, like, I feel like that's part of our role within advocacy, is to make sure that we are advocating for our customers. I always feel like that's a key piece, but we're also sharing the voice of our customers, because I always try to incorporate customer interviews into everything that I'm doing each quarter. So I'm less customer facing probably in my role now than I ever have been in my career, which is a little tough for me at times. So I try to really tie in that customer interview into my quarterly goals, right? I want to speak to so many customers just because it helps me feel grounded to the customer, to understand where they see value, where we can provide more value. But I think it's important that we have their voice in everything that we're doing. So to me, it's just making sure you're tying that into your day to day, right? So for me, it's not part of my day to day anymore to be involved with customers. So I have to make time for that. Internal stakeholders are really my focus right now. So I need to make sure that I'm aligned with them all the time, that I'm always trying to seek out new people or new teams that I can meet with, just to say, like, this is what we're doing. This is where we're focused. Is there an opportunity for us to collaborate closer together? And again, I love that aha moment of like, we can work together. This is a way we can really kind of drive value for the organization and our teams together.
I want to give Deena a chance if you have a question, since I've been asking all the questions, and I think I don't hear that doggy toy anymore. So,
Well, it was a doggy chicken. So yeah, no. My apologies for the squeaky toy. I don't have a question, but more so just kind of a final thought. I don't know if we're there yet, or if you have another question, Liz.
Oh, okay. Well, I do have one more question that I'd like to bring in on that. Well, actually, it's just to something Kristen just said, which, oh no, I mean, I knew this, Kristen. I'm just having a little bit of an aha moment. It's like, if you're doing advocacy correctly, the balance is natural, because your job, your role is to send that information between those two parties. Like, it is to connect those two parties. That is your job. So if you are doing it correctly, you don't have to fight necessarily for the balance, because you build the advocacy on both sides of the fence by bringing the voice of both sides to the other party. And so it should happen, hopefully, I mean, there's work, but it should happen somewhat organically, that you've got to bring the voice of the customer to the internal stakeholders. That gets them all excited. Like you said,
Yes.
They have the aha moment of, oh my gosh, I could be getting this information, or I could be doing this with customers, or I could be doing this. And then you've got to bring that internal stakeholder value all the way back to the customer, because the programs, as we know, and this was the importance, we can get into this just a little bit, the importance of internal alignment and education and enablement is, now I can bring a lot of value back to customers as we build these programs, because we can't build them in a vacuum. You certainly, at an organization the size of Siemens, cannot support programs or run yourself programs across all these different products. And so they need to know how to bring value back to their customers as well, which is a huge win for your customers. So, on the value, Kristen, if we take this all the way back full circle, like, why do you believe ongoing education and enablement is so important when it comes to customer advocacy?
Yeah, I would say I'm going to tie this back to, I think I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to answer another question that I think is important to also highlight. I would say the area where I've seen kind of the quickest win in programs that I've stood up from the customer side and on the product side. So really, if there's a way to build programs that are focused on the product, around giving insight into the product, or product betas or areas like that, the product teams seem to see value very, very quickly. And then that's a win for both the customer and the product teams, that you can go around and tell the rest of the organization on that mutual value. Mm-hmm. So I've often seen customers in their interviews are saying, I want better access to product management, or I want to be participating in product betas, or better access to the roadmap. Really standing up those valuable pieces in some of the programs that we're building, so customers see value, but then the product teams do as well, right? They're getting better access to customers, and really showing that as a win, gets buy-in and support from other people. They're like, oh, well, that's great. Like, you're actually building value on both sides. Are there ways that we can participate in that? And then people are knocking down your door to say, hey, I saw this happening over here. Is there a way that I can be closer to our customers or involved in this type of thing? And that's why I think education enablement is so important. You have to show the wins. You have to educate your teams. And if you don't, I mean, they're not even going to know you exist within the organization, which you're not going to have a successful customer advocacy function if people don't know you exist and don't understand the value that you're providing to customers, but also internally. Mm-hmm. And again, that's, I think, the key to the success of any program, whether it's a small company or a large company like Siemens. You're always educating and enabling your stakeholders across the organization. Mm-hmm. And again, I always feel like that's a key part of my job, is to evangelize customer advocacy across the organization.
I love that, Kristen, and show, don't tell. We can talk about customer advocacy and be really passionate about customer advocacy and define customer advocacy and do all sorts of, wonderful background work, but really showing your internal stakeholders the power and potential of customer advocacy. That's the
key, right? If you don't, because a lot of times they're skeptical in the beginning. I have definitely had the skeptical, they're like, oh, okay, you're really going to do that. It's, and then it's like, as soon as you see that win, people are like, oh, again, that aha moment of, oh, you are delivering on what you said. This is beneficial to our customers. We really need to do this. And until you do that, people won't necessarily buy in and support. You really have to prove your value.
Oh my goodness. We have to wrap, but I just want to make it clear to our listeners when, Kristen kind of skated over, enable them, give them resources, templates, massive amount of work that Kristen has put into doing this. So, if you want more detail, you should definitely connect with Kristen on the types of documents, the types of templates, everything that she's working on. I'm sure she would love for you to connect with her on LinkedIn. But, Kristen is in a very unique role. We've seen a few now, the Center of Excellence for Advocacy, which is primarily about enabling and supporting internal teams to go out and enact advocacy, but in a way that's consistent across the organization, in a way that follows best practices, in a way that gives equal value to the customers and to the organization. So this is a new practice in the customer advocacy practice. So a new function in the customer advocacy practice. So you are a bit of a pioneer, Kristen. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I love it. It's always my favorite part. Like I said, I love starting new functions or doing, different things with an organization. There's always a lot of uncertainty. There's definitely a lot of learning best practices, talking to you guys, talking to other people that are doing things similar. But it's so much fun to kind of be the first to do different things. I love it. Again, it's like a startup environment. You get to try things. You get to be very agile in how you're doing things. But then the payoff at the end is so big because you don't even realize all the stuff that you're doing until you look back and it's like, oh, we built this function and all of this went into it. I think that's that's always a challenge. You never realize how much of an impact you're making in the moment until you look back.
Oh, I love that. We've got to end on that. Never know how much impact you're making at the moment until you look back. And for sure, there are challenges in being a pioneer, but it's probably way more fun than just following what everyone else is doing. Right. All right. Well, Kristen, thank you so much. This was really, really interesting. I love what you're doing. I love talking about new topics like this. We love listening to you. And it's just such a thrill hearing about everything that you're doing at Siemens. We'll have to follow up and then see where a bunch of this is going in another year and another 2 years. But definitely loved having you. Thank you so much for being our guest here today on Talk Advocacy to me. And we hope to have you again sometime soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the Halloween edition. I enjoyed it. Again, we probably should have dressed up in Halloween.
Total fail. All right, everyone. Have a good day.
Kristen.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.